Row 312, March 6, 1916. Cote 304, northwest of Verdun. A sentry blinks against the fog from shell bursts, hears burlap brushing wire, smells pitch and paraffin before he sees the men. Dark shapes slide into the traverse like a knife slipping cloth. One flame roars, another coughs. In under 4 minutes, the trench bay is taken, the listening post is gone, and the night closes again. A gap the length of a railcar opens in a line that was supposed to be solid. By sunrise, stretcher bearers lift bodies that look more like the result of a factory accident than combat. The French officers studying the cratered ground count what the survivors whisper. Not massed waves, but small groups. Not rifles first, but grenades and fire. Not slow, but sudden. The contrast is brutal. The casualty list for this stretch of parapet is 1 company. The enemy team that did it was smaller than a platoon. The numbers begin to mount. By March's end, the Germans have probed a dozen times on fronts measured in hundreds of meters. The pattern seems erratic. The pattern is not erratic. It is being engineered. By February 21, 1916, Verdun has already become a machine of attrition. German artillery opens with a bombardment measured in millions of shells. Whole woods evaporate. Villages vanish. Map squares are chewed into anonymous moonscapes. But inside that thunder, something quieter evolves. The German army is refining a new way to break into a trench, seize a handful of yards, and cripple the enemy's ability to fight back before mass reserves arrive. The word is not new, but the meaning sharpens. Stormtoopers, assault troops, are moving from theory to system. They organize around a simple dilemma. Trenches resist frontal assault because linear firepower punishes exposure. So do not expose. Do not announce. Do not spread a line. Concentrate shock. The assault group is the smallest possible machine for delivering effects at point-blank range. A wedge of 8 to 12 men, 2 to 4 grenadiers, each with a satchel of stick grenades, 10, 12, sometimes 15 each, a pair of men with long-handled wire cutters and a bag of wooden stakes for marking passages, a couple with pistols and trench knives whose job is to clear dugout mouths, 1 or 2 pioneers with explosive charges and a flamethrower team attached for specific objectives, a leader with a whistle, a pocket watch, and more responsibility than rank suggests. Each man is trained to do one thing well. All are trained to adapt. Rifles matter less. Grenades matter more. At 10 meters, a rifle is slow. A stick grenade is final. The French sector commanders at Verdun discover this in increments, in night raids that last fewer minutes than it takes to call the artillery. The clock rules everything. If the alarm signal cannot travel from a trench bay to a battery in time to lay down a curtain of fire, the first men in the trench will dictate outcomes. The Stormtroopers exploit that lag. They operate in the space between detection and response, a space measured not in miles, but in seconds. The map around Verdun tells why these seconds matter. The Meuse curves around a fortress district anchored by hills that are not high but decisive. Le Morhum, Côte 304, Côte 321, and to the east, the more famous Douaumont and Vaux. Each feature is a knob of ground that sees and is seen. To hold height is to hold observation. To hold observation is to call fire. When heavy guns dominate battlefields, to lose a ridge is to be measured and then erased. French doctrine in early 1916 assumes linear defense with courage in place. Courage the French do not lack. Units rotate into Verdun, knowing the arithmetic. Some divisions lose 1 out of every 3 men in a single turn. To sustain the line, General Philippe Pétain imposes the Noria, a water wheel system rotating divisions through Verdun so that exhaustion is shared and the front never empties. The lifeline is a single road, the Voie Sacrée, pulsing with trucks, about 1 vehicle every few seconds at peak traffic, moving 40 to 60,000 men and thousands of tons of ammunition each week. The French system works because it moves mass. But mass is slow. The Stormtrooper raids are designed to be fast. The raids also solve for terrain. Verdun's shell holes breed dead ground and short lines of sight. Trench zigzags cancel rifle arcs and favor things that can curve, bounce, or pour. Grenades curve, gas curls, flame pours. In that geometry, a small group that can slip along wire lanes, leap trench bays, and neutralize just the right strongpoints can tear an opening wide enough for nothing and everything to come through. Nothing immediate, everything later. Before Verdun, German assault experiments had been episodic. pioneer detachments with flamethrowers in 1915, ad hoc grenade teams improvising behind smoke screens. By spring 1916, a cadre has coalesced around one idea: train for the last 20 meters. The doctrine is not written once, it is iterated after each raid. Live fire rehearsals, dummy trenches built to the enemy standard, timed runs in darkness, strict load plans for each man's kit. Assault troops drill until a sequence of actions can play out under stress without words. The sequence is brutal in its simplicity. Reconnaissance to identify routine, which sentry walks, which dozes, when the ration party comes, where ladders lean against the parapet. Wire cutting begins days before, deep at night, done with discipline. One cut does not produce a raid, it produces the path for a raid later. On the appointed night, artillery drops not a wall of fire, but a pattern: short stabs to mask sound and slice telephone lines, a few short salvos of heavy shells to keep men underground, smoke to confuse, then quiet. Men move. The first objective is not glory but geometry: seize a traverse and the traverse behind it to block reinforcement and fire. Grenades clear corners no eye can see. The linguistics of the fight change. Fights are measured in trench bays. Objectives are labeled by letters on a mud diagram. The grenadier counts: 1 to throw, 2 to brace, 3 to move. The flamethrower team remains behind cover until the grenades stop producing results, then steps up to end resistance that will not move. The sight line of flame is 20, maybe 25 meters. The terror radius is larger. At Verdun, French soldiers encounter close fire in the tightest spaces. Accounts note the heat of flame on wet sandbags, the sudden silence that follows a stick grenade explosion, and the sick knowledge that the enemy is now inside the wire. The shock is not from something entirely new. Flamethrowers had been used before. Grenades are not inventions, but from their orchestration. The Stormtroopers act like a team executing a plan, not a crowd improvising a brawl. The difference is systemic. By March 1916, German commanders employ these assault groups to achieve specific local goals: destroy listening posts, snatch prisoners to identify units, wreck machine gun nests, seize a traverse that opens a blind alley for later, larger attacks. Numbers sustain the story. A full-strength assault detachment might commit 40 or 50 men to penetrate a front of 100 meters, spend 10 minutes inside the trench, and return with 6 or 8 prisoners, maps, and a dugout's worth of demolished gear. The casualty ratio, on good nights, favors the raiders by 3 or 4 to 1. The French response begins with shock and moves to adaptation. The immediate counter is simple: make the interval between alarm and fire smaller. Batteries are pre-registered on their own frontline trenches. Trigger rockets and flares go up at the first sound of wire clatter. Infantry are drilled to use the telephone less and the signal pistol more. A local barrage, tir de barrage, can arrive in under 2 minutes if procedures are tight and battery crews are waiting. 2 minutes is the difference between an assault group trapped inside a trench and an assault group that has already exited with prisoners. Pétain's staff pushes further. If the attack lives in the last 20 meters, then defense must be built for depth. Rather than one line to break, create a defense in layers. Move machine guns back from the lip so they can sweep traverses that seem safe. Build positions that can survive losing the first trench bay without giving away the second. Train sentries to hear what matters: a shift in the wind carrying the smell of fuel, the scratch of metal on wire, the rhythmic thump of men moving in short dashes. Issue more grenades. Teach every squad to fight like a stormtroop group when the enemy appears among them. By April, the night belongs to neither side. The stormtroopers refine a counter to the counter. If artillery curtains fall quickly, then enter in multiple small teams that can scatter and exit through different gaps. If machine guns are withdrawn from the parapet, then carry more grenades to arc around corners that now lie deeper within. If flares reveal white identification bands painted on sleeves and helmets, scrub them off and adopt code words to prevent friendly fire. Each adaptation generates another. The rhythm of Verdun includes these raiding duels, even as great set-piece battles surge and recede. When a French counterattack tries to retake Douaumont, when Mortem's slopes fill with dead, when Fort Vaux becomes a concrete lung in June and men drink water from limestone, the night raids continue. They shape the space into which those larger movements must fit. They keep defenders nervous. They make the plateau feel porous. What the raids do to French morale is not linear. Courage endures. The record shows men stand, fall, return, repeat. But the raids puncture certainty. For months, soldiers had learned to fear the big barrage that announces a major attack. They dig deep. They wait out the storm. They prepare to repel infantry when the shelling lifts. The Stormtroopers invert the sequence. Sometimes the big barrage does not come. Sometimes the quiet is the warning. The silence of the minutes before a raid becomes the loudest sound of the night. By May, the French begin to treat every night as suspect. Listening patrols stalk the no man's land, cutting their own lanes through wire so that counter-raiders can exit quickly. Grenade drills multiply. Bombers, grenadiers, become a recognized specialty, with canvas sacks, spare fuses, and the habit of keeping the left hand free for the trench wall. Each company learns to post ambushes inside its own trench line. If the enemy wants the last 20 meters, meet him there. But the German stormtroopers have another lever: time. They raid at intervals designed to create uncertainty, twice in a week on one sector, not at all for 10 days next door, then 3 in a night across a kilometer. The effect is dissipation. Every unit must remain ready every night. Readiness costs sleep, and sleep is the currency of endurance. The material side of the raids is precise. Each grenadier's load is counted down to weight and reason. A standard stick grenade weighs about 1.33 pounds. A man carrying 12 of them is burdened with more than 15 pounds just in bombs, plus sidearm, water, wire cutters or stakes, spare fuses, and sometimes a coil of rope or a light ladder. The flamethrower team carries even worse: tanks that together weigh scores of pounds, fuel that sloshes, a hose that catches on every corner, and a weapon whose backblast can blind others in darkness. The team's endurance is measured in bursts, seconds of fire before moving again. The assault group's watch is synchronized to that endurance. Speed is not style, speed is survival. The Germans test the limits of this instrument in the Douaumont-Vaux sector in June, when large and small attacks intersect. As the fortress of Vaux holds out under siege, storm groups slip into safads and crater edges, destroy French observation posts, and destroy the telephones that keep the fort in touch with its supporting infantry. The longer the raids disrupt local command, the more the fort suffocates in isolation. When Vaux finally falls, it is not because of trench raids alone, but the raids have contributed to the conditions: the fog of uncertainty outside the fort and the thinning of the line that would have relieved it. French staff officers compile figures. On nights with raids, the rate of emergency artillery expenditure doubles. Ammunition is life at Verdun, delivered on a schedule that already strains the Voie Sacrée. If one night's raids force the firing of an extra 500 shells from a single battery, and 10 batteries on that sector do the same, the math is not abstract. Trucks must run longer, drivers must risk darkness, mechanics must keep engines alive, infantry must unload boxes by hand. The stormtroopers' grenades pull strings that reach all the way back to motor pools. By late summer, the French response has matured. They build obstacles not just to stop men, but to channel them. Short wire crescents that funnel raiders into killing angles. False gaps whose stakes lie under mud and nail the foot. Dummy dugout doors that lead to pits with tripwires for flares. They assign counter-raiding sections to each company with orders to exit the trench when the enemy enters, not to stay and die among the bays. They push machine gun crews to practice immediate action drills: tripod planted, traverse set, arcs memorized for short bursts, sweeping their own traverses safe, unsafe, safe. They learn to borrow the raiders' clock. The stormtroopers adapt again, but the curve of improvement flattens. Surprise cannot be mass-produced indefinitely under fixed conditions. The French learn the feel of a raid, the presence of certain units, the smell of certain fuels, even the way the enemy moves: short rush, pause, 2 men to a corner, 1 grenade, 1 pistol, becomes recognizable. In some sectors, the French kill rates during raids improve. The 2-minute artillery curtain become 90 seconds, then 80, then less. Here the story seems to settle into equilibrium, but a deeper layer emerges in autumn, and it changes the meaning of what Verdun taught. In October and November, French counteroffensives retake ground that had cost rivers of blood to lose: Douaumont, Vaux, the slopes that fed German observation. The French do not do this by rejecting the stormtrooper logic. They absorb it. Bombers lead. Small groups find seams. Protective barrages are prearranged and trigger fast. Local commanders are given more license to act on initiative in the dark. The French armies carry more grenades, coordinate more tightly with pioneers, and think less in straight lines and more in nodes of resistance and corridors of movement. The enemy's signature has become a common language. This is the reveal. The shock France felt in spring was not just about brutality, it was about a system. The German stormtrooper raid at Verdun was a rehearsal not only for infiltration, but for modern combined arms thinking at the smallest scale. It taught that the last 20 meters require specialized tools, tight timing, and disciplined improvisation. The French learned that lesson under fire. As they learned it, the raids bled away some of their magic. The causal chain is clear. Stormtrooper raids compelled French batteries to be quicker. Quicker batteries demanded better communications. Better communications demanded more reliable forward posts. Forward posts required better training. Better training moved down to the squad. Everything that had been exceptional became routine. What happened next made the pattern obvious. In 1917 and 1918, both sides would deploy assault tactics by different names and with evolving tools across the front. But Verdun is where the French first encountered the system at scale. Verdun is where the Germans refined it. Verdun is where the night for a long season belonged to men who carried more grenades than cartridges and measured success in the number of seconds they could steal from the enemy's clock. Return to the March raid on Côte 304. The sentry who smelled fuel before seeing flame did not fail out of fear. He failed because he was targeted as a node in a process. The raiders had cut the wire days before. They had rehearsed the route on a trench built from memory. They had learned the rhythm of that post's ration party and chosen a moment when one habit displaced another. They had planned how to isolate the traverse behind the sentry before killing or capturing him. When they moved, the plan had already done most of the work. Numbers tell the truth here. A raid that lasts 8 minutes might feature less than 60 seconds of contact inside the trench. The rest is approach and exit. A group of 10 men might throw 25 grenades. A flamethrower team might fire only 2 bursts. The prisoners taken might be 3 men who walked up a communication trench to investigate after hearing the first grenade and were pinned by the second. Every second that those 3 delayed the phone call increased the odds that a supporting barrage would begin too late. The engineers of storm tactics watched these numbers and tweaked variables. If the average French response time on a particular night sector dropped below a minute, they would either shorten their objectives or shift sectors. If flares appeared to be pre-positioned to illuminate predictable gap lanes, they would create a second decoy gap and run through the first only to switch paths mid-approach. If dugouts were found with 2 exits, the first grenade would be followed by a short flame burst, then silence while a second team waited at the back door. It reads like chess at speed. It felt like murder in darkness. The moral shock in French ranks is recorded in company diaries and in the behavior of replacements. New men learned to fear the quiet more than the barrage. Veterans taught them small rituals that could save a life. A second ladder propped 2 traverses away for exit. Grenades stored in a dry sandbag with the fuses aligned. The habit of stepping toward a trench corner with the left shoulder forward and the right hand ready so that a grenade can arc without catching. The caution to never stare at a flare, but to look at the ground and read shadows. These are not heroic principles. They are survival rules for a world where the immediate enemy is not a mass one can see, but a handful one cannot. The raids also forced the French to reconceive courage. In 1914 and 1915, bravery looked like standing up under fire and advancing in line. At Verdun in 1916, bravery often looked like holding the mouth of a dugout with 2 men and 3 grenades while someone sprinted a telephone message back to a battery. It looked like crawling 15 meters in mud to knock out a listening post that had become a lure. It looked like discipline, the kind that says, do not chase, do not get lost, do not give them the seconds they need to become ghosts again. By October, the balance of ground begins to reverse. The French recaptured Douaumont after methodical work that looks, on the small scale, like what had hurt them. The movement towards depth, toward flexibility, and towards small unit initiative shows in the relative cleanliness of some counterattacks. Not clean in human cost, Verdun never pays that kind of currency, but clean in the sense that effect follows cause by design, not chance. The thesis becomes possible to state. Stormtrooper raids at Verdun shocked France, not because they were crueler than the bombardments that leveled the hills, but because they revealed that modern war's decisive moments had shrunk to the size of a trench bay and the length of a minute. Offense and defense would be decided by men trained to own those minutes. The consequences spread beyond the moves. Training syllabi across the French army incorporate more practical grenade work, more night movement, more emphasis on section leaders making calls in broken terrain. Artillery units refine their rafale, the quick burst barrage, so that calls from forward positions trigger fire almost before the phone is set down. The voix sacrée continues to pulse, but now it feeds a front whose smallest gears mesh more tightly. The mythology that would grow up around Verdun, endurance, they shall not pass, absorbs a quieter truth. They shall not slip through either, not without losing those seconds to men who have learned how to take them back. The costs never leave the frame. Verdun chews through lives in both armies at a rate that makes tactical cleverness feel small. French casualties across the year rise into the hundreds of thousands. German losses mirror them closely enough that victory becomes a word without content. But within that void, the raids left a residue of method. After Verdun, no commander with sense assumes that one strong line and fixed procedures at night are enough. After Verdun, the idea that small groups, well-trained and tightly timed, can punch above their weight becomes a premise, not a hypothesis. There is irony here. The German stormtrooper system thrives under conditions of attrition because it is cheap in ammunition and dear in skill. France, forced to absorb its shocks, learns to fight with smaller doses of the same medicine. When larger operations return to the Western Front in 1917 and 1918, each side will wield portions of this method. The details change, the weapons lighten, new automatic guns appear, infiltration deepens. But the heart is the same. Cut wire in advance, control the clock, hit nodal points, and leave before mass arrives. In the minds of men who endured Verdun, the memory of raids is personal. A corporal remembers the way silence once meant safety and then came to mean danger. A lieutenant remembers learning to count intervals between flares while plotting an exit path backward from a planned ambush inside his own line. An artillery sergeant remembers sleeping fully dressed with a note pinned to his sleeve stating prearranged targets so that if the phone rang, he could order a curtain before he was completely awake. These are the imprints of a system settling into muscle. The raids did not decide Verdun. The artillery did not decide Verdun. Logistics did not decide Verdun. Verdun was decided by endurance and deprivation and an industrial scale of violence that broke most simple categories. But the stormtrooper raids clarified one decision point. They made visible that the scale of modern war contains multitudes. At one end, a road carrying trucks one after another for months. At the other end, a trench corner and the 30 seconds after a flare. By December 1916, the line at Verdun looks almost like a restored coastline, its contours more favorable to France than in spring. The shock of the early raids has faded into doctrine. Men going up to the line carry more grenades, more flares, more instincts tuned to the same close fight the enemy had brought to them. The Germans have not abandoned the method, but the monopoly is gone. Surprise, like a resource, has been consumed. Return to the opening hour one last time. 0312, March 6, 1916. Cote 304. Imagine the sentry again, and then widen the frame. Behind him, a battery whose crew sleeps in boots with lanyards tied to wrists. Behind them, a column of trucks whose engines are kept warm all night. Behind the column, a staff plotting rotations so that no single division bleeds to death alone. The stormtroopers cross the wire and kill a squad. The staff across the valley moves numbers on a map. The battery wakes and drops a curtain. The trucks deliver shells for tomorrow's curtain. The water wheel turns. Not through mass alone, but through timing and teams. Not through one decisive blow, but through hundreds of precise bruises and the skill to absorb them. Not through glory at daylight, but through processes in the dark. France was shocked by the stormtroopers at Verdun because the raids revealed something essential. The war's center of gravity was not the parade ground drill or the heroic charge, but the practiced minute when the enemy appeared inside the last traverse. Learn that minute. Live through it. Repeat. The hills around Verdun look quiet now on the map, names without echoes. But if you stand on a slope in your mind and look toward the old lines, you can see the shape of modern war in the simplest objects: a bag of grenades, a watch face, a signal flare arcing, a system reduced to its smallest pieces. A night where the silence is not safety, but the warning that the clock is about to start.